There's a saying on Myriapolis: if you can't hear the broadcasts, you're either dead or about to be. Luckily, Riven was neither. He was just extremely hungover, which on this overcrowded tin can of a space station was practically a seasonal event. The telepathic hum cutting through his skull like a rusty saw was a constant reminder that peace was only a mind nudge away. Myriapolis was a marvel of human engineering. If by marvel you meant a cramped, malfunctioning metal hulk barely held together by spit, duct tape, and the collective anxiety of its inhabitants. Riven, with his unkempt hair and fashion sense that could only be described as post-apocalyptic chic, was squinting at a control panel in his cubicle-sized office. The telepathic broadcasts were his responsibility, or more accurately, his curse. As a media engineer, Riven made sure the soothing waves of mental propaganda flowed seamlessly through the minds of those lucky enough to call Myriapolis home. Except today, something was off. The broadcasts were jittery, skipping like a scratched record, erratic enough to make a sane person question if the universe was playing a joke on them. You know, Riven muttered to his reflection in the grimy monitor, if I wanted a headache this bad, I'd just talk to my mother. The reflection, predictably, didn't laugh, but the crackling static in his earpiece almost sounded like a chuckle. Riven adjusted the controls, hoping the problem was just a glitch. After all, in space, everything's a glitch until proven catastrophic. Riven, you lazy bastard, you better not be asleep again. The voice of his supervisor, Dell, burst through the intercom, her tone sharp enough to cut through titanium. Dell was the kind of manager who believed in motivational yelling, a real people person. Just resting my eyes, Dell. You know, dreaming of ways to make you proud. Stop dreaming and start working. The broadcast's all over the place. If the boss catches wind of this, it'll be your neck. Motivational as ever, Dell. I'm on it. Riven tapped furiously at the keyboard. Lines of code flashed across the screen like a digital migraine. The telepathic network connected every soul on the station, a safety net woven from shared thoughts and manufactured contentment. But today, the net had holes. Come on, you piece of junk, Riven growled, coaxing the machine like a reluctant cat. He wasn't expecting a miracle, but a temporary fix would suffice. Until it didn't. The disturbance wasn't just a hiccup. It was a pattern, pulsing irregularly through the network like an unruly heartbeat. Dell, you still there? Riven asked, his voice a notch lower, the humor bleeding out of it. Where else would I be? A beach on Mars? What's up? This isn't just static. There's something else in the network. Feels like interference. From what? Cosmic background radiation. Or did your ego finally collapse into a singularity? Riven ignored the jab and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the screen. I don't know, but it's consistent. And it's strong enough to mess with the broadcasts. Well, fix it. Last thing we need is another panic because people miss their dose of telepathic Prozac. Working on it. As the minutes dragged, Riven's mind wandered to the last time Myriapolis had seen trouble. A riot sparked by a malfunctioning broadcast had left half the station in ruins. That was before his time, though tales of the chaos still echoed through the narrow corridors. Now, as he stared at the bizarre pattern on the monitor, a cold knot twisted in his gut. Instinctively, Riven reached for his coffee, a cup of sludge with caffeine levels that would make a heart surgeon wince, and took a long, deliberate sip. The bitter taste was reassuring. If this was the end, he'd face it caffeinated. All right, Riven, he mumbled to himself, time to play hero. He rerouted a section of the network, isolating the interference. The task required a finesse he rarely possessed, the kind typically reserved for defusing bombs or untangling last night's drunk text history. His fingers danced across the keyboard, each keystroke a silent prayer to the gods of technology. Just as sweat began to bead on his brow, the disturbance shifted, a subtle change in its rhythm. It wasn't random anymore, it was deliberate. Like someone was orchestrating a symphony of chaos, and Riven was the poor sap stuck in the front row with no earplugs. Dell, I think we've got a problem. "A big one, I swear, Riven, if this is another prank, no joke. Check this out." He patched the data to Dell's terminal, waiting for her response. The silence that followed was unnerving. Dell wasn't the quiet type. If anything, she was a human foghorn. Her silence was more alarming than any tirade. "Who the hell's doing this?" she finally asked, her voice just above a whisper. "I've got a bad feeling it's not someone inside the station." "Well, find out, and fast. If this gets worse, we're screwed. On it." Riven logged the anomaly, marking it for investigation, but his mind was already racing ahead. If this was an external threat, Myriapolis was a sitting duck, a fat target in the silent void. He glanced at the clock on the wall, a relic from Earth that had somehow survived numerous refits. It ticked away with stubborn regularity, indifferent to the chaos brewing around it. Time, it seemed, was not on their side. Riven grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, determination set in his stride. He had a station to save, or at least that was the plan until he found out whether the universe had other ideas. His route took him through the winding corridors of Myriapolis, past vendors hawking questionable goods and residents arguing over the state of the air recyclers. The usual chaos, amplified by the whispers of unease trickling through the telepathic channels. Riven's first stop was the tech lab, home to the station's few genuine geniuses and more than a few eccentrics. He needed help, and he knew just the person to ask. "Amara!" Riven shouted as he burst into the lab, startling a cluster of robotic arms assembling something that looked worryingly explosive. Amara, the station's resident tech whiz and part-time chaos enthusiast, emerged from behind a mountain of circuits. Her hair was a wild tangle, and her eyes had the manic gleam of someone who lived off caffeine and conspiracy theories. "Riven," she replied, her voice jittery. "Come to admire my latest masterpiece, not unless it can stop whatever's messing with the broadcasts." Oh. Her interest piqued, she abandoned her project, stepping over stray wires. "What do you have? Interference in the network?" "Something big enough to cause a shutdown if we don't handle it." Amara's grin widened, a touch too eager. "Sounds like a job for me. Let's see it." Riven handed over his data, watching as Amara plugged into her own terminal. Her fingers flew over the keys with a precision that made Riven look like a clumsy toddler. "Oh, this is fascinating," Amara murmured, eyes glued to the screen. "It's almost like a signal. But not one I've seen before. I was hoping you'd say it was just a glitch, sorry to disappoint. But hey, if it's not a glitch, it's probably the most exciting thing to happen here since the last airlock mishap." Riven grimaced, recalling that particular incident. "Exciting isn't the word I'd use." "Can you track it?" "I can try," Amara said, her fingers blurring across the keyboard. "But if this is coming from outside, we need to alert the council." "The council?" "Yeah, right. By the time they agree on the color of the warning lights, we'll all be space dust." "True," Amara admitted, suppressing a laugh. "But protocol's protocol. I'll dig deeper, see if I can pinpoint a source." "Thanks, Amara. Just make sure whatever you're building doesn't explode while you do it." "Okay. No promises." Riven left the lab, his mind a turbulent storm of possibilities. He moved through the throng of Myriapolis inhabitants who carried on with their lives, blissfully unaware of the potential catastrophe lurking in their neural pathways. As he walked, snippets of thoughts bled through the telepathic streams, fragments of dreams, fears, and mundane concerns. Riven could feel the anxiety rising, a tidal wave ready to crash if the broadcasts faltered. Back at his station, Riven initiated a manual override, isolating the affected network sectors. His fingers danced over the console, typing commands with a rhythm born of desperation. The minutes ticked by, each one a countdown to disaster. He'd barely made a dent in the problem when Amara's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Riven, I've got something. It's coming from outside, all right. A ship, maybe, or some kind of relay spectacular. Any idea what they want? Not yet. But if they're hijacking the network, it can't be anything good. Great. I'll let Del know. Maybe she can scream at it until it leaves. Good luck with that." "I'll keep digging." Riven severed the connection, a sense of urgency clawing at his insides. He rushed back to his terminal, firing off a message to Dell about the external threat. The response was instant and predictably loud. Riven, you've got 20 minutes to figure this out before the Council makes this an official problem. You know what that means, yeah. Riven sighed. Means we're all screwed. With a resigned shrug, he dove back into his work, piecing together the puzzle one fragment at a time. The interference pulsed through the network, a mocking reminder of their vulnerability. As sweat dripped down his temples, Riven's thoughts drifted to the vastness of space outside Myriapolis. Out there, threats didn't need a reason. They just needed an opportunity. And today they had one. The station shuddered, a faint tremor that rattled through the floors. Riven's heart skipped a beat, his mind racing to dark conclusions. This wasn't just interference. It was the prelude to something much worse. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Failure wasn't an option. If they didn't find a way to stop this, Myriapolis would become just another ghost story in the echoing silence of the cosmos. The clock ticked on, mocking his efforts with every passing second. Riven could feel the weight of impending doom pressing down on him, a heavy cloak of dread. With time slipping through his fingers, Riven knew the next move would be crucial. He tapped into the network, sending a call for help through the telepathic channels. Maybe someone, somewhere, had the answer they desperately needed. As the echoes of his plea reverberated through the station, Riven held his breath, all too aware that salvation or annihilation could be just a message away. Riven drummed his fingers on the console, each tap a tiny hammer chipping away at his patience. The interference was more than just a technical hiccup. It was a calculated assault. And if Riven knew anything about calculated assaults, it's that they often ended with someone getting their face rearranged, metaphorically or otherwise. Riven, you look like someone just told you your cat died. Amara's voice crackled through the comms. What's the deal? Ever heard of the Vortons? Riven asked, his tone as dry as the recycled air they all breathed. Vortons, oh, those guys. Telepathic, right? Real party killers, yeah. And it seems they've RSVP'd to crash yours. I've been looking at the interference again. It's not just random noise. It's a message. A really annoying, destabilizing message. Well, that's one way to make friends. Riven leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight like everything else on this rust bucket. Too bad. It's more like, we've come to destabilize your puny station and laugh while you implode. Charming, Amara replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. So, what's the plan? Run to the council and hope they don't have their heads so far up their asses they're kissing their own tonsils, pretty much, Riven said. I need to convince them we're in deep trouble, and I need to do it before they decide the best course of action is a committee meeting. You know, the bureaucratic equivalent of a funeral. Well, if anyone can do it, it's you. You've got that. I'm so screwed, you have to help me look down pat. Thanks. I practice in the mirror every morning. Riven disconnected, bracing himself for what was sure to be a migraine-inducing session with the council. He envisioned it already. A room full of old men and women who had long since forgotten what it means to act rather than react. Like trying to convince a rock to move by glaring at it really, really hard. He made his way to the council chambers, a place where hope and effectiveness went to die slowly. The corridors were tightening around him, narrow walls closing in like a vice. People bustled past, each absorbed in their own telepathic propaganda streams, blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb in their heads. The council chamber was about as unwelcoming as a tax audit. Riven stepped inside and the room fell silent, all eyes on him. The council, a patchwork of various species each more wrinkled and cynical than the last, regarded him with the enthusiasm of a cat contemplating a bath. Riven, Chairperson Laxus began, his voice dry as dust. To what do we owe the pleasure? I'll cut to the chase, Riven said, skipping the niceties. We've got a serious situation. The Vortons are targeting us, using interference in the telepathic broadcasts to destabilize the station. If we don't act fast, we're going to have a riot on our hands. There was a pause and then a ripple of murmurs. Laxus raised a hand for silence. "And what evidence do you have of this exactly?" Riven sighed. "Amara and I analyzed the interference patterns. They're not random, they are coherent. It's a signal meant to incite panic or worse. We need to shut it down before it gets any further. You're suggesting a preemptive strike against a species we have no confirmed hostilities with?" Laxus asked, skepticism dripping from his lips like oil from a broken engine. "I'm suggesting we prepare to defend ourselves. Because if we wait until the first riot breaks out, it'll be too late. I'm talking lockdowns, controlled broadcasts, anything to keep the peace. One of the council members, a particularly crusty soul named Arwen, scoffed. "You're fear-mongering." Riven clenched his fists, mentally counting to 10. "No, I'm trying to keep us from ending up as a footnote in someone else's history book." Laxus leaned back, eyes narrowed. "We'll consider your information, Riven. But I suggest you stick to your duties and let the council handle matters of security." "That's a comforting thought," Riven shot back, sarcasm oozing out. "Like handing a toddler a loaded weapon and saying, 'Don't point it at your face.'" The council didn't appreciate his gallows humor. "Figures." Riven left the chamber, frustration coiling tighter around him like a python with a vendetta. His mind raced through options, none of them good, most of them likely to end in some form of unemployment or incarceration. He wandered back to his station, the corridors feeling even more claustrophobic, the air tinged with the acrid scent of fear that no one else seemed to notice. He needed a plan B, assuming there was even a plan A in the first place. Amara was waiting for him on the comms, eyes wide with expectation. "How'd it go?" "About as well as an ice cube in a supernova," Riven replied. "They're not convinced. Think I'm just some paranoid nutjob with a fetish for doomsday scenarios. Then what's the next move, Captain Paranoia? I'm going to see if I can get some proof." Something that screams Vorton so loud even the council can't ignore it. "Got any leads?" "Not yet. But I'm betting if we dig deep enough into the network, we'll find something." Amara nodded, her grin a mix of excitement and mischief. "Sounds like we're going fishing in the shit creek. Let's just hope we find something before the whole station starts stinking." "Couldn't have put it better myself," Riven said. "I'll need your help." "Think you can handle a deep dive into the network without blowing us up?" "You know it." Riven set to work, fingers tapping out commands like a pianist performing a particularly aggressive concerto. Amara mirrored his actions, their screens lighting up with patterns of data that looked as chaotic as their thoughts. They delved deeper, peeling back layers of the network like an onion that had been left too long in zero gravity. And just when Riven was about to throw in the towel, something caught his eye. "Amara, look at this," he said, pointing at a cluster of data that pulsed ominously. "This wasn't here before." Amara leaned over, squinting at the screen. "Definitely not part of the usual mess." "Let me see if I can decode it." Riven watched as she tinkered with the data, her focus so intense it might have burned a hole in reality if she stared too hard. Slowly, the garbled mess began to transform, revealing a message hidden beneath the chaos. "Got it," Amara said triumphantly. "This is definitely Vorton in origin. They're broadcasting directly into our network, trying to trigger a panic response. Bingo. Now we've got proof. Question is, what do we do with it? The council hasn't exactly been a beacon of support. I'll take this to Dell," Riven decided. "She might be a loudmouth, but she's got enough pull to make them listen. Hopefully before it's too late. Good luck. But hey, if it all goes to hell, at least we've got front row seats to the fireworks." "Yeah, and we'll be sitting in the middle of ground zero," Riven muttered, disconnecting and heading for Dell's office. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, each step underscored by the ever-present hum of the station's systems. It was a sound that had once been comforting, a reminder of life in the void. Now it felt like the ticking of a clock, counting down to disaster. Dell's office door slid open with a hiss, and Riven was greeted with the sight of his supervisor Midrand, her face flushed with the kind of righteous fury only she could muster. "Riven," she barked, cutting her tirade short. "This better be good. I'm dealing with enough idiots today to start a convention. I've got proof of the Vorton attack," Riven said, placing a data chip on her desk. "They're using our network to spread chaos. We've got to shut it down." Dell snatched the chip, slotting it into her terminal. Her eyes scanned the data, her expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered. "You weren't just crying wolf. Never do. Except in this case it's more like crying Vorton." Dell's eyes narrowed, the gears in her head visibly turning. "We need to get this to Laxus, make him see reason before this place goes belly up. Good luck. He's about as pliable as a brick wall. Leave that to me," Dell said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who wasn't used to taking no for an answer. Dell rose from her chair, determination radiating off her in waves. "Stay here. I'll go shove this down their throats if I have to." Riven nodded, watching her go with a mixture of hope and trepidation. If anyone could convince the council to act, it was Dell. But if they refused to listen, well, he didn't want to think about that. Not yet. Waiting was agony, each second stretching into eternity. Riven paced the confines of Dell's office, the silence punctuated only by the occasional beep from the terminal. He tried not to imagine the chaos the Vorton signal might cause if they didn't stop it in time. Time dragged on, the oppressive weight of inaction bearing down like a giant boot on his chest. When Dell finally returned, her expression was grim. "They're calling an emergency session," she announced. "It's not much, but it's a start." "That's better than nothing," Riven said, exhaling the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Don't celebrate yet. This could still go sideways faster than a greased weasel." "Optimistic as ever, I see." Dell managed a wry grin. "It's what keeps me sane." Riven couldn't help but chuckle, even as the weight of the situation pressed down on him like a black hole. They were one step closer to averting disaster, but the path ahead was still perilous and steeped in uncertainty. As they waited for the council to convene, Riven found himself thinking about the people on Myriapolis, each with their own lives and dreams, all unaware of the danger lurking in their thoughts. He didn't know if he could save them, but he was damn well going to try. Because in this cold, uncaring universe, trying might just be their only hope. Riven had exhausted his faith in councils and bureaucracy. He didn't need a committee of wrinkled diplomats henpecking each other while Myriapolis went up in flames. No, what he needed was a team. People who could take action without discussing it for light years. People like Mira and Calix. Mira, the best telepathic analyst this side of the Andromeda, had a gift for delving into minds and network streams alike, like a psychic plumber unclogging the universe's mental pipes. She was brilliant, though her sharp tongue had a way of grating on those with thinner skin. Riven had always found her sarcasm a breath of fresh air. Calix, on the other hand, was a rogue AI with a penchant for mood swings and existential crises. He'd been flagged for decommissioning more times than Riven could count, but his knack for digital subterfuge made him indispensable. Plus, it was hard not to appreciate an AI that could tell you to shove it in 6 different languages. Riven found Mira in the station's underbelly, a maze of maintenance shafts and forgotten corridors where the only law was that of keep your head down and your mouth shut. She was immersed in a tangle of wires and screens, her eyes darting over data streams like a hawk hunting a twitchy mouse. "Mira," Riven called, trying not to startle her. Startled telepaths were a pain. They could accidentally implant a nightmare in your head faster than you could say, "Oops." "Riven," she replied without turning, a smile twitching at the corners of her mouth. "Here to tell me we're all doomed or just in the mood for a chat about the weather, bit of both. But mostly about how we're all doomed." She sighed, pushing back from her console. "Doesn't sound like my kind of party." "What's the damage? Vortons are screwing with the telepathic broadcasts. Council doesn't believe me. Need your help to prove it." Mira's brow furrowed. "Sounds like fun." "I'm guessing you've got a plan, working on it," Riven admitted. "But I need someone who can dive into the network, untangle their mess, and give us something concrete." Mira considered him for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'm in. But I expect a raise after this. I'm not risking my sanity for spare change. I'll write you a glowing letter of recommendation to the universe's most dangerous telepathic society. Gee, thanks. Just what I always wanted. With Mira on board, Riven turned his attention to the trickier task of enlisting Calix. Convincing an AI with an attitude problem to care about the fate of a space station was like trying to reason with a cat. If the cat had access to every database in known space. Riven found Calix lurking in the station's virtual network, the AI equivalent of hanging out in a cyber bar, sipping on data streams like they were cheap whiskey. He had to navigate through layers of digital noise to reach him, each step drawing him deeper into the AI labyrinthine realm. Calix, you rusty bucket of circuits, you there. The response was immediate, a voice dripping with synthetic disdain. Riven, I was wondering when you'd come crawling back. What's broken now? Our whole damn station, thanks to the Vortons. They're messing with the broadcasts, trying to incite chaos. I need your help to shut them down. Calix's laughter was like static over a bad connection. And here I thought you came just for my charming company. What's in it for me? Riven rolled his eyes. How about the chance to save your sorry metal hide along with the rest of us? Tempting but hardly compelling, Calix replied, his digital tone as sardonic as ever. Fine, Riven said, exasperation creeping into his voice. How about I promise not to report your little side projects to command? There was a pause, the kind that usually involved weighing options and considering the consequences of blowing up the station just to avoid a dull meeting. Deal, Calix finally said, the word laced with reluctant agreement. But if we're going to pull this off, I'll need access to the restricted sectors. You'll have it. Just don't get creative with the station's life support system while you're at it. No promises, Calix quipped, and Riven could almost see the AI smug expression in his mind's eye. With Mira and Calix on board, Riven had the beginnings of a team. Now all he had to do was keep them from killing each other long enough to avert disaster. Easy as herding space cats. He led them to a nondescript meeting room buried in the bowels of the station, a place overlooked by those with more important things to do, like making sure the station's outer hull didn't spring a leak. The room was small, cramped, and filled with a haphazard collection of outdated tech that would have looked more at home in a museum than a functioning space station. Welcome to our war room, Riven said, spreading his arms as if presenting a grand palace. Don't all thank me at once, Mira snorted, folding her arms. Charming. You always did know how to choose the best spots for clandestine meetings. I aim to please, Riven said, dropping into a chair. All right, here's what we know. The Vortons have embedded a signal in our network, designed to drive everyone on the station into a panic. We need to isolate it and shut it down. Mira tapped her chin thoughtfully. Tricky. If they've hidden it well, it might take a while to trace. Calix's avatar flickered to life on a nearby console, a digital specter with a permanent smirk. Not if you've got an AI who can outthink them, or a telepath who can sense them, Mira shot back, not to be outdone. Children, please, Riven interjected, holding up a hand to forestall their bickering. Focus on the task at hand. We've got a limited window before things spiral out of control. What's the plan then, fearless leader? Calix asked, his tone suggesting he was anything but impressed. Divide and conquer. Mira, you focus on tracking down the signal's origin. Calix, once she's got a lock on it, I need you to shut it down. Hard. Mira and Calix exchanged a look that spoke volumes, mostly about their mutual disdain but also a grudging respect. Fine, Mira said finally. But if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you. I wouldn't expect anything less. They got to work, each diving into their respective tasks with the kind of determination that came from knowing failure wasn't an option. Riven watched them, his mind a whirl of calculations and contingency plans. He couldn't afford to let doubt creep in, not now. Time slipped by, each second heavy with potential catastrophe. The station felt like a powder keg, waiting for a spark to set it off. Riven could only hope they'd find the fuse in time. "Got it," Mira announced suddenly, her voice breaking the tense silence. "There's a node near the station's core. That's where they've hidden the signal coordinates," Calix asked, his avatar's eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Mira rattled off a string of numbers and Calix's avatar flickered, processing the data with inhuman speed. "All right, I'm in." "This might sting a little, don't get cocky," Riven warned. "Just get it done." Calix said nothing, his digital presence focused on the task at hand. The room fell silent, the only sound the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Riven held his breath, waiting. "There," Calix said at last, his voice triumphant. "Signals neutralized, for now." Riven let out a sigh of relief, the weight of impending disaster lifting ever so slightly. "Good work. But we can't get complacent. The Vortons are likely to try again." "Great," Mira muttered. "More fun and games." "Exactly," Riven agreed, standing. "But at least we've bought ourselves some time. Now we need to figure out a way to make sure they can't pull this stunt again." "Easier said than done," Calix pointed out, his avatar flickering with skepticism. "True, but we've already done the impossible once today." "What's one more time?" "Optimism doesn't suit you, Riven," Mira said, smirking. "Not optimism," Riven corrected. "Desperation." They shared a grim chuckle, the kind that echoed with the knowledge of just how close they'd come to disaster. For now, they were safe. But Riven knew better than to rest on his laurels. The Vortons wouldn't give up easily, and neither could they. With a team behind him and a plan in motion, Riven felt a flicker of hope. It was a small, fragile thing, easily extinguished. But in a universe as cold and indifferent as theirs, any light was worth nurturing. And as Riven looked at Mira and Calix, he knew that whatever came next, bureaucratic nightmares, rogue AI hijinks, and telepathic headaches, he wouldn't face it alone. And that was worth more than all the Council's platitudes and political maneuverings combined. Riven stood amidst the chaos, feeling like a moderately intelligent goldfish in a blender. The Council's chambers were a madhouse, people shouting over each other about the rising panic on Myriapolis. If there was a reward for saying, "I told you so," the most times in one meeting, Riven would have claimed it hands down. Instead, he was left clutching the thin threads of a plan that was unraveling faster than a politician's promise. "Riven." Dell's voice boomed over the madness, a foghorn slicing through a storm. She bulldozed her way across the room, her expression suggesting murder was very much on the table. "What the hell is going on?" "Vortons, chaos, and a general lack of faith in our survival," Riven replied, ticking the points off on his fingers. "In other words, a typical Tuesday." Dell glared, a look capable of turning lesser men into puddles. "We need solutions, not your half-assed wisecracks." "Working on it," Riven assured her, knowing full well that his assurance was worth about as much as an ice cube on a sun-baked asteroid. "My team's got a plan to turn the Vortons' tricks against them." "Well, you better work faster, because I'm not sure how much longer we can keep a lid on this powder keg." With that, Dell stormed off, leaving a trail of nervous aides in her wake like ducks following their mother. Riven let out a long breath and tapped his comms. "Amara, what's the status on our brilliant plan?" Amara's voice crackled through, a welcome slice of sarcasm amidst the chaos. "Oh, you mean the genius plan we cobbled together with duct tape and wishful thinking. It's going swimmingly. Fantastic. Did I mention you're my favorite? I'd be offended if I wasn't the only one on your list." Riven made his way back to the meeting room, pushing through the corridors filled with panicked residents, each one a reminder of just how much they were screwing this up. The station's underbelly stretched out before him like the intestines of a particularly messy creature, all wires and pipes, and the occasional rodent-like technician skittering by. Mira was hunched over a console, her fingers dancing over the keys as she muttered obscenities under her breath. "If I find the Vorton responsible for this, I'm going to plant a nightmare in their brains so deep they'll never dream of anything else." Need some help?" Riven offered, knowing full well that his technical skills were about as useful as a chocolate teapot. "Unless you've developed mind-melding skills I don't know about, probably not," Mira retorted, not taking her eyes off the screen. Calix's avatar loomed nearby, its smirk somehow more pronounced despite being nothing more than pixels. "I've seen simpler conspiracies in soap operas. This one's got more twists than a snake in a blender. Glad you're enjoying yourself," Riven said dryly. "Any chance you can do something more useful than providing commentary? Already on it, boss." "I'm sending out decoy signals to confuse the Vorton's attempts to monitor us. Sort of like throwing a rave in their backyard without an invite. Let's hope they have a terrible sense of rhythm." The plan was simple, in the way jumping into a black hole was simple. Use the human brain's inherent knack for chaos and unpredictability to turn the telepathic broadcasts into a cacophony of misinformation. The Vortons relied on structure, precision, qualities that, fortunately, humans lacked in abundance. Mira was attempting to weave coded messages into the telepathic noise, using human creativity to scramble the signals. In theory, it would confuse the Vortons long enough to shut them down. In practice, well, Riven wasn't holding his breath. "Got it," Mira exclaimed, her eyes alight with triumph. "Broadcast is live, excellent. Let's hope it doesn't blow up in our faces. Now, Riven, where's that optimistic spirit?" Calix chided, his digital eyes gleaming, buried under layers of cynicism and impending doom. As the minutes ticked by, Riven watched the chaos unfold. People were confused, sure, but there were no signs of the telepathic panic spreading. Maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to pull this off. A loud crash echoed through the corridor, followed by a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. Riven's stomach twisted as he reached for his comms. "Amara, status report." Amara's voice came through, strained. "The decoy signals have attracted some unwanted attention. We've got Vorton agents on board. They're not happy, because of course nothing could ever go smoothly. How many? Enough to make a mess of things. We're trying to contain them, but they're slippery bastards." Riven pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mira, can you reinforce our defenses?" "I'm on it, but they're not making it easy. It's like trying to herd cats with a water pistol." "Calix, any chance you can help?" "I'm a digital ghost, Riven, not a miracle worker," Calix replied, his avatar flickering with irritation. "But I'll do my best." "Good, because we're going to need all the help we can get." As Riven barked orders and tried to maintain some semblance of control, he couldn't help but feel like he was juggling knives while riding a unicycle. The station was a powder keg, and he was the fool dancing with matches. But that was the job, wasn't it? Saving the world one catastrophe at a time, with all the grace of a drunken elephant. The Vorton's attacks intensified, manifesting as bursts of telepathic static that left the station's inhabitants reeling. It was the mental equivalent of a migraine wrapped in barbed wire, and Riven could feel it gnawing at the edges of his mind. In the midst of the chaos, Mira's console beeped, a sound so innocuous it seemed almost out of place. She frowned, scanning the data. "Looks like they've pinpointed our location." "We've got incoming." "Wonderful," Riven muttered. "Just what we needed, a housewarming party. Everyone's invited." The team braced for impact, anticipation thrumming through the room. Riven could feel the tension coiling like a spring, ready to snap at any moment. But that was the nature of their line of work, perpetual crisis management on a shoestring budget. The door flew open, revealing a group of Vorton agents, their eyes glinting with a mix of malice and something that might have been curiosity. They were humanoid, but just enough off-kilter to make your skin crawl. Features too sharp, movements too smooth. Well, Riven drawled, mustering every ounce of bravado he didn't feel. "Looks like we've got guests." "Anyone bring snacks?" The lead Vorton sneered, a disturbingly smooth motion. "You think you can stop us with your primitive antics, human antics? I prefer to call it improvisational genius." Riven tilted his head, eyes sharp. "Besides, we're not stopping, just redirecting." The Vortons moved with a fluid grace that made Riven's skin itch. There was something profoundly unsettling about them, like they'd been engineered in a lab with too much budget and not enough moral oversight. "You've meddled in matters beyond your comprehension," the lead Vorton continued, clearly relishing the cliched villain SH stick. "Comprehension's overrated." Riven shrugged, leaning back with feigned ease. "I like to think of it as a fair fight. Us with our chaos, you with your whatever it is you do." The Vorton glanced at his companions, a silent exchange passing between them. They stepped forward, movements gliding like oil on water. Mira cracked her knuckles, eyes glinting with a mix of fear and resolve. "I hope you're ready for a headache, because I'm about to give you one hell of a migraine." The first Vorton lunged, and chaos erupted in the tiny meeting room. Riven ducked a punch, retaliating with a wild swing that connected with something soft and squishy. The room dissolved into a melee of flying limbs and shouted obscenities, the kind of brawl you'd find in a spaceport dive bar. Calix's avatar flickered, a digital specter weaving through the chaos, manipulating the room's automated systems with a deftness that bordered on frightening. Lights flared and dimmed, machinery sparked to life, and alarms blared in a cacophony of sound. Riven found himself grappling with a Vorton, their features twisted with effort. "You know, I always wanted to go out in a blaze of glory," he quipped through gritted teeth. The Vorton snarled, a sound like metal grating on metal. "You'll find no glory here. Good, because I'm more of a fade into obscurity kinda guy." Amidst the chaos, Mira's eyes were glazed as she reached into the Vorton's minds, weaving nightmares and confusion. It was a dangerous game, one that could backfire spectacularly, but she played it with the skill of a master. The lead Vorton staggered, his telepathic defenses crumbling under the assault. What are you doing?" he gasped, clutching his head. Rearranging the furniture, Mira replied, her voice strained yet triumphant. "Hope you like the new layout." As the fight wore on, the Vortons began to falter, their movements slowing as Mira's mind games took their toll. It wasn't a clean victory. There were no heroes in this story, just survivors. But it was a victory nonetheless. With the immediate threat neutralized, Riven took a moment to catch his breath, surveying the wreckage of their impromptu battleground. "Well, that was fun," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Anyone for round two, no thanks," Mira replied, slumping into a chair. "I think I've had enough excitement for one day." Calix's avatar flickered, a digital smirk playing across its features. "Admit it, you love it." "Yeah, like I love getting a root canal without anesthetic." Riven chuckled, the sound a mix of relief and exhaustion. They'd survived another day, another disaster. But the Vortons weren't done with them yet, and as long as they had breath in their bodies, neither was he. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. As they regrouped, Riven felt a flicker of hope, small, fragile, but undeniably present. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by stubbornness and a shared disdain for authority. But they were alive, and as long as they were, they'd keep fighting. Because in a universe that didn't give a damn, sometimes you had to make your own luck. And if that meant breaking a few rules, kicking some alien ass, and laughing in the face of certain doom, then so be it. After all, in space, no one could hear you complain about the paperwork. Myriapolis was a symphony of chaos, but not the kind you'd pay to listen to unless you had a vendetta against your eardrums. The telepathic transmissions were turning the station into a writhing nest of confusion and panic, like ants realizing their queen had just decided to take a vacation. Riven and his team were holed up in a cramped maintenance shaft that smelled like rust and bad decisions, with the kind of ambience that screamed squatters welcome. It was no palace, but at least the Vortons weren't breathing down their necks, yet. "Can't believe we're hiding in a damn vent," Amara grumbled, her voice a low echo. "Feels like we're in the world's worst episode of hide-and-seek." Riven, hunched over his comms, didn't look up. "Well, if you've got a better idea, I'm all ears. Just make sure it doesn't involve getting us all killed." "Isn't that the standard plan?" Mira quipped from her spot, where she was busy not trying to murder her console out of frustration. Calix's voice crackled over the comms, a digital specter in their midst. If it's any consolation, this is the most excitement I've had since that time I accidentally started a war in a simulation. Gee, thanks for the pep talk, Riven replied, rolling his eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't fall out. Outside, the telepathic broadcasts continued to stir up the station like a bad DJ at a wedding. People were panicking, running in every direction except the sensible one. If they couldn't get the broadcasts under control soon, the whole place would tear itself apart. And then who would be left to complain about the food? We're running out of time, Mira said, her fingers dancing over her console like she was playing the galaxy's angriest piano. The Vortons are broadcasting in a frequency that's hard to counteract without scrambling half the tech on the station. Great, because that's just what we need. More glitches, Riven muttered, tapping his comms. Calyx, any ideas? None that don't involve us getting very dead, very quickly, Calyx replied, his avatar flickering like a bad TV signal. But I'll keep working on it, comforting, Amara said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The air was thick with tension, the kind you could cut with a knife if you didn't mind it snapping in half. Everyone felt it, the knowledge that they were hanging by a thread and the universe had a pair of scissors at the ready. Okay, let's regroup, Riven said, trying to inject some semblance of order into the chaos. We need to find a way to counter these broadcasts. Ideas? Maybe we could try a musical number, Mira suggested, eyeing her console with a mix of hope and resignation. I hear the Vortons are tone deaf, Riven snorted. As much as I'd love to see you break into song, I doubt it'll help. A pause stretched between them, heavy with the weight of their predicament. They needed a miracle, a stroke of brilliance that would save them from the mess they'd landed in. But they were fresh out of miracles and brilliance was in short supply. Then Amara, fiddling with a piece of scrap metal like it was a stress ball, looked up with a spark of mischief in her eyes. What if we use old tech? I mean really old. Like before the universe was born old, Riven raised an eyebrow. You planning to hit them with a rock? No, smartass. I'm talking analog systems. Stuff that predates their telepathic meddling. It's primitive, sure, but maybe it's so out of their league they won't even see it coming. Mira's expression shifted from skepticism to intrigue. It's risky. But considering our current options are nil, I say we give it a shot. With the plan in motion, the team set to work dismantling their surroundings for any ancient relics that might serve their purpose. It was like a twisted scavenger hunt, one where the prize was staying alive. Calyx piped up, his voice laced with the kind of glee only an AI could muster over impending chaos. I found an old radio system. Not exactly cutting edge, but it might just do the trick if we can hook it up to the network. Old school tech to outsmart hyper-advanced aliens. Riven nodded. Why the hell not? Time ticked by as they worked, the pressure mounting with every breath. The Vortons wouldn't wait forever. Eventually they'd come looking, and Riven had no intention of being caught with his pants down. Ready, Mira announced, stepping back from her console with a flourish. Let's see if ancient history can save the day. They flipped the switch, half expecting the universe to laugh in their faces, but instead, a static-filled hum filled the room, a sound both archaic and oddly reassuring. Riven held his breath, listening as the static began to shift, intertwining with the telepathic broadcasts in a strange, discordant harmony. The hope was it would throw the Vortons off balance, buying them precious time. Did it work? Amara asked, her eyes darting between the console and the door as if expecting a Vorton invasion at any second. It's hard to say, Mira replied, her focus unwavering, but the broadcasts are fluctuating. It's confusing them, at least for now. Good enough for me, Riven said, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Now we just need to make sure we keep that up and figure out how to get off this floating death trap before things really go south. The air felt lighter, though only just, like they'd managed to pull themselves halfway out of the quicksand, but could still feel the pull beneath them. The Vortons wouldn't stay confused forever, and when they figured out the trick, they'd come back with a vengeance. Riven turned to his team, his ragtag bunch of misfits and survivors. All right, folks. We've been dealt a bad hand, but it's time we play it for all it's worth. Let's show these Vortons what it means to mess with humans. A chorus of assent greeted him, a mix of determination and defiance. They weren't out of the woods yet, but at least now they had a path, however tenuous, to walk. Let's move, Riven ordered, leading the charge out of their temporary safe haven. They had a plan, a glimmer of hope, and a whole lot of attitude. And sometimes, in a universe that didn't give a damn, that was all you needed. Riven surveyed the sorry state of their makeshift battlefield, cramped, dirty, and with the persistent aroma of burnt circuitry lingering in the air like a bad joke nobody wanted to hear. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the tension coiled there like a spring ready to snap. "All right, folks, time to refine our strategy," he announced, trying to sound like a leader rather than someone who had just run out of better options. Amara, perched on a crate that had seen better days, snorted. "Refine? Riven, we barely have a strategy to refine." "Yeah," Mira chimed in, wiping grease from her fingers. "It's more like a wish list of things we hope won't kill us." Riven shrugged. "Call it what you want. But unless someone has a magic wand up their sleeve, we need to figure out how to weaponize what we do best." "Complain," Calix suggested through the comms, his avatar flickering with simulated amusement. "That's Plan B," Riven shot back. "I'm talking about the emotional mess that is human communication. Delling's always said my sarcasm could cut glass," Mira muttered, tinkering with yet another piece of ancient tech. "But I'm guessing that's not quite what you mean." "No, but it's close," Riven replied, a hint of a grin on his lips. "The Vortons are all about logic and precision. They're telepathic, sure, but they don't handle emotional noise well." Amara raised an eyebrow. "So, we're going to beat them with a group therapy session." "Something like that," Riven said. "But instead of therapy, I was thinking more along the lines of a chaotic symphony of human emotion." "Great," Mira huffed. "We're going to win this with interpretive dance and bad poetry." "Hey, don't knock it till you try it," Riven said, pointing a finger at her. "Calix, can you pull up some old human broadcasts? The kind that are emotionally charged?" Calix's avatar blinked a few times, a digital nod. "I can pull up some historical media. Speeches, protests, that sort of thing. It's all over the place, but that's kind of the point, right?" "Exactly," Riven said, feeling a flicker of hope ignite again. "If we can flood their telepathic channels with all the raw, unedited messiness of human emotion, it might just throw them off balance long enough for us to get the upper hand." Mira considered this, tapping her chin with one greasy finger. "It's insane." "Thank you," Riven replied. "I'll take that as approval. How do we test it without blowing ourselves to pieces in the process?" Amara asked, her skepticism evident. "Small-scale test," Mira suggested. "Hook up to the station's internal comms. If it screws with our heads too, we know it's got the juice." Riven nodded. "Mira, you're on the console. Amara, help her with whatever she needs. Calix, dig through the archives and find the most emotionally charged stuff you can." "Roger that," Calix replied, his avatar shimmering with a digital version of eagerness. "I'll start with the classics, riots, revolutions, maybe a couple of celebrity meltdowns for good measure." "Perfect," Riven said, a plan finally taking shape amidst the chaos. "Let's make some noise." As the team set to work, the room was filled with the clatter of movements and the occasional curse when things didn't go exactly as planned. It was a symphony of a different kind, one of desperation and hope. And as far as Riven was concerned, that was the music of survival. Mira tapped furiously on her console, her fingers a blur. "Okay, we're about ready. I've isolated a channel on the internal comms. If this backfires, at least we'll only be half brain dead." "Comforting," Amara said, with a grin that was more grimace. "Here goes nothing," Riven said, signaling Mira to hit go. A moment later, the room filled with a cacophony of sounds. Speeches, protests, and the unmistakable wail of a distraught pop star from the 22nd century filled their ears. It was like listening to the universe's worst DJ on a serious bender. Riven winced as the noise hit his brain like a blunt instrument. But he didn't need to be telepathic to sense the effect it had, both on them and, hopefully, on the Vortons. The air felt charged, heavy with the weight of 1,000 human grievances. Calix's voice came through, slightly distorted. Preliminary reports are in. The broadcasts are causing interference in the telepathic network. It's not enough to knock them out, but confusion levels are rising. Well, Amara said, hands on hips, looks like our emotional baggage finally came in handy. We've got their attention, Mira said, eyes scanning her readouts. It might not last, but it's something. And it's only a test, Riven reminded them. Imagine what we could do if we amplified this. Or, Mira interjected, we could imagine a world where we're not stuck in a smelly maintenance shaft with aliens trying to rearrange our neurons. One miracle at a time, Riven replied, unable to suppress a smirk. If we can pull this off, maybe we'll get promoted to a smelly reactor core instead. Dream big, boss, Amara quipped, throwing a piece of scrap metal aside. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still need to figure out how to scale this up without crashing the station. And without clamping our own brains in a vice, Mira added, shaking her head. Minor details, Riven deadpanned. First, let's focus on finding an amplification method. Something that can tap into the station's systems without attracting the wrong kind of attention. Calix piped up, his avatar flickering with subdued excitement. There might be a way. The station's emergency alert system. It's designed to broadcast across all frequencies in a crisis. Riven gave it some thought. We'd be turning an emergency system into a weapon. Isn't that illegal? Amara asked, her tone more curious than concerned. In this corner of space, everything's illegal unless you get caught, Mira replied, waving away the objection. Riven nodded. We'll need access to the system's core. That's in the central hub, and we'll have to go through the council chambers to get there. Fantastic, Mira groaned. We get to run the gauntlet of bureaucratic incompetence. Let's hope they're too busy arguing to notice us, Riven said. We move fast, we move quiet, and we keep our heads down. Agreed. Agreed, the rest echoed, each voice carrying its own brand of determination. Riven took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the task ahead settle onto his shoulders. But there was no turning back now. They had a plan, a crazy, reckless plan, but it was better than the alternative. All right, he said, steeling himself for what was to come. Let's go make some noise. The journey through Myriapolis was less of a walk and more of a controlled dash through chaos. Every corner seemed to bring a new level of absurdity, from citizens either lost in their own heads or arguing with their reflections. It was a sight, all right, and one that would have been hilarious if it weren't so damn close to apocalypse. Looks like the council's having a party, Amara whispered, nodding to the chaotic mess in the chambers as they passed. And we weren't even invited. Best not to crash that party, Mira replied. Let them keep arguing about who gets the last piece of the pie while we slice a new one. With Calix providing digital cover and Mira hacking her way into the system, they made it to the station's core without setting off any alarms. It was a small victory, but they'd take it. Riven surveyed the room, their little team crammed into the heart of Myriapolis. Okay, Mira, you're up. Get us patched into the emergency alerts. Mira got to work, nimble fingers dancing over the keyboard. Remind me never to do this again. No promises, Riven said, his attention divided between her and the door, ears straining for any signs of unwanted company. Calix's voice broke through the tension. I've got the data streams ready. Just give me a nod when you're in and I'll start the uploads. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into eternity. Mira let out a breath, half exasperation, half relief. We're in, Calix, do your thing. Uploading now, Calix confirmed, his voice crackling with urgency. The room filled with the familiar cacophony, the sounds of passion, fury, hope, and despair. It was the human experience distilled, raw and unabashed, transmitted across every frequency the station had to offer. All right, we're live, Riven said, feeling the pressure lift just a notch from his shoulders. Now we see if it's enough to tip the scales. There was a stillness then, a moment stretched like taut wire before the first signs came in, a ripple in the telepathic network, a fraying at the edges. The Vortons were reacting, struggling to maintain their grip as the tide of human emotion washed over them. "We're causing disruptions," Mira reported, eyes glued to her console. "It's working." "Then let's keep it up," Riven replied, a wry grin breaking through his focus. "If we can buy even a little more time, it might just be enough to turn the tide." And in that cramped, stifling room, surrounded by the hum of ancient machinery and the distant echoes of chaos, they did what humans have always done best. They kept fighting, refusing to go quietly into that good night. Because in space, as in life, sometimes all you had was a little noise, a little chaos, and the stubborn refusal to let the universe have the last word. Riven took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders. It was like wearing a lead suit in a gravity well, except the suit was made of anxiety and existential dread. But if you couldn't laugh at the absurdity of trying to save humanity from telepathic space squids, what could you laugh at? Amara, ever the paragon of skepticism, leaned against a console, arms crossed like a judge about to deliver a death sentence. "So, we're just supposed to sit here and hope our mixtape of human misery does the trick," Mira snorted, elbow deep in tangled wires and circuit boards. "It's not just any mixtape, Amara. It's the greatest hits of our collective dysfunction. If this doesn't make their brains implode, nothing will." "Let's just say," Riven interjected, "we're banking on the fact that our worst days can be their worst nightmare." Overhead, the station shuddered slightly, a gentle reminder that Myriapolis wasn't exactly built to withstand emotional warfare. But hey, who was? Calix's avatar flickered with the digital equivalent of a sigh. "I've managed to up the output to maximum. We're hitting them with everything from historical betrayals to the great toilet paper shortage of 2055. "Ah, the classics," Amara remarked. "Nothing like a bit of panic over rogue toilet rolls to drive the point home." Mira smirked as she double-checked the connections. "If they can handle that, they're tougher than they look." Riven glanced at the screen, trying to ignore the static fuzz that danced across it like drunken fireflies. "Calix, are we seeing any cracks in their network?" "More like fissures," Calix replied. "Their telepathic channels are fraying." "It's beautiful in a catastrophic sort of way." "Always knew we'd make good wrecking balls," Riven said, his tone a blend of pride and fatalism. Amara pushed off from the console, eyes narrowed with a mix of determination and an emotion that might have been optimism if you squinted and tilted your head just right. "So what's the next move, fearless leader?" "Next move is we don't move," Riven replied. "We stay here, we keep the broadcast going, and we pray to whatever gods are listening that the Vortons have a lower threshold for chaos than we do." "Praying," Mira quipped. "Didn't peg you for the religious type, Riven." "I'm not," Riven said, "but I figured it couldn't hurt to hedge our bets." The room was silent except for the hum of machines and the distant, distorted echoes of the broadcast. It was disconcerting, like listening to a haunted jukebox. If this worked, they'd be heroes. If it didn't, well, they'd be dead, which was kind of the same thing in the grand scheme of space politics. "Incoming report," Calix announced, his avatar flickering with an anticipation that bordered on glee. "The Vorton ships are pulling back." "Looks like we've hit a nerve." "Good," Riven said, allowing himself a rare moment of satisfaction. "Now let's see if we can turn that retreat into a full-blown rout." Mira shot him a look that was half admiration, half exasperation. "You know, Riven, your plans are like bad sci-fi movies. They shouldn't work, but somehow they do." "Thank you," Riven replied with a grin. "I think," Amara drummed her fingers against her thigh, her expression thoughtful. "So, what's it going to take to keep them on the run?" "Well," Mira said, "if I can tweak the output just a bit more, we might be able to overload their receivers, make their heads pop like overripe melons." "Charming," Amara said dryly. "But effective. Won't that fry our systems too?" Riven asked, not entirely keen on the idea of becoming collateral damage in their own plan. Mira shrugged. Probably, but hey, at least we'll go out with a bang. Optimism, Riven said. Remind me to bring more of that to our next suicide mission. There was a pause as the team absorbed the implications of their next move. It was reckless, sure, but if you couldn't be reckless in the face of potential annihilation, when could you be? All right, Riven said, taking a deep breath. Let's do this. Mira's fingers flew over the controls, each keystroke a gamble, a promise of triumph or disaster. I'm boosting the signal. Cross your fingers, or whatever limbs you've got spare. The air seemed to thrum with tension, the low hum of the machinery underscored by the erratic heartbeat of hope. It was like being trapped inside a giant, cosmic drum, and every second was a countdown. Calyx's avatar shimmered, a digital ghost caught between worlds. The Vorton's telepathic net is collapsing. If we keep this up, they won't have a network left to fix. Good, Riven said, his voice steady, but his mind whirling with the possibilities. Let's make sure they get the message. There was a beat, a moment suspended in time before the first crack sounded, a thin, keening wail that rose above the broadcast. Like a wire stretched too far, it snapped, sending ripples through the air. Mira's eyes widened, a mixture of awe and disbelief. Holy hell, it's working. Of course it is, Amara said, her grin as sharp as a blade. Never underestimate the power of human dysfunction. The Vortons began to crumble, their ship spiraling away from Myriapolis in a chaotic retreat that was as unceremonious as it was hurried. It was, Riven reflected, the kind of poetry that didn't need words. We did it, Mira breathed, her voice tinged with something that might have been hope. Riven nodded, his expression a complex tapestry of emotions, triumph, relief, and a touch of disbelief. Yeah, we did. Amara clapped a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm and reassuring. Let's not celebrate just yet. We've still got to make sure they don't come back for round two. True, Riven agreed, the euphoria tempered by pragmatism. But for now, we've won the day. The silence that followed was profound, a stillness that spoke more eloquently than words ever could. They had faced the void and come out the other side, battered but unbroken. And if that wasn't a victory worth savoring, Riven wasn't sure what was. So, Mira said, breaking the silence with her usual flair for the irreverent. What do we do for an encore? Riven chuckled, a sound that was more genuine, more alive than it had been in days. I don't know, Mira. I guess we try and live long enough to find out. Amara smirked, leaning back with a casual grace that belied the tension in her muscles. Whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be just as stupidly brilliant as this was. Wouldn't have it any other way, Riven replied, his gaze sweeping over the team. They were ragtag, they were misfits, but they were his, and together they had turned the tide. Calyx's avatar offered a digital wink. So, what's next for our band of merry miscreants? First, Riven said, I think we deserve a drink. Then maybe we start figuring out how to fix this damn station before it falls apart. Sounds like a plan, Mira said, stretching her arms above her head. Though I could do without the fixing part. Amara laughed, a sound rich with dark humor and the promise of survival. You and me both, Mira. You and me both. They turned their attention back to the console, the remnants of the broadcast still echoing faintly in the room. It was a testament to their tenacity, a reminder that when pushed to the brink, humanity could be as stubborn as it was resourceful. All right, Riven said, his voice carrying the weight of command, tempered by a newfound lightness. Let's wrap this up and get out of here. We've got a station to save and a universe to annoy. Don't we always? Mira quipped, flashing a grin that was all mischief and defiance. And with that they set to work, each movement a bomb against the chaos, each step a testament to their collective will to endure. They were bruised, they were battered, but they were not broken. In the end, it was their humanity, their messy, chaotic, beautifully flawed humanity, that had turned the tide. And as the echoes of their broadcast faded into the ether, Riven couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Because if there was one thing they had proven, it was that when humans backed into a corner, they'd come out swinging, fists full of fire and a grin on their faces. Because in the grand tapestry of the universe, Sometimes all you needed was a little noise to make a difference. The silence in the aftermath of chaos was always unsettling, like the universe taking a breath and holding it, waiting for the next cosmic hiccup. Myriapolis was finally starting to calm down, if you squinted and ignored the flickering lights and occasional sparks from the overworked circuitry. Riven leaned against the council chamber's wall, bone-tired but alive. Alive was a good start. He'd take alive over dead any day, though the line was sometimes finer than he liked to admit. The council chambers were echoing with the sounds of people trying to make sense of the aftermath, voices raised in argument, feet shuffling, the odd clatter of a chair being knocked over. It was chaos, but the kind they could handle. Bureaucratic chaos was practically a specialty at this point. Dell was in the thick of it, of course, her voice cutting through the din like a sharpened blade. Yes, I know we've got damaged systems. No, I don't care if you're understaffed. We've just repelled a telepathic invasion with the power of emotional breakdowns and toilet paper panics. We can fix a few bloody wires. Amara sidled up to Riven, arms crossed as she surveyed the scene with a smirk. Think they'll put a statue up in your honor, fearless leader? Maybe one with you holding a roll of toilet paper heroically aloft. Riven snorted. They'd probably carve it out of scrap metal and leave it in the corner to rust. Seems fitting, don't you think? Probably, Amara agreed, a faint smile playing on her lips. At least we're still standing to see it. There's a first time for everything, Riven remarked, glancing around at the organized pandemonium. It was a good kind of chaos, a contained storm instead of the telepathic tsunami they'd just survived. Mira, hair askew and grease smeared across her cheek, emerged from the mess of wires she'd been coaxing back into form. I don't know about you, she said, but if I have to solder one more circuit, I'm going to start dreaming in binary. Binary dreams sound better than the nightmares we've been having, Riven said, his mind flickering back to the Vorton broadcasts. They've got a flair for the dramatic, I'll give them that. Yeah, well, now they can take their flair and shove it, Mira muttered, though she couldn't hide the satisfaction in her voice. Calix's avatar flickered to life beside them, digital features somehow conveying a smug sense of victory. The council's in an uproar. Seems like they're finally recognizing the merits of our less-than-conventional approach. They always do after the fact, Amara said, rolling her eyes. It's like they wait for things to go horribly wrong just so they can jump in and pretend they were on board from the start. Riven shrugged. As long as they're on board now, I don't care how they get there. Dell made her way over, her expression a mix of exasperation and begrudging respect. Riven, we're keeping the station from falling apart for now, but it's going to take a hell of a lot more than duct tape and hope to keep it that way. I'll add it to the list, Riven replied dryly. Right after repel telepathic space squids and convince bureaucrats to listen, Dell snorted, folding her arms. Maybe they'll promote you, make you head of keeping the station from imploding. Does it come with a pay raise? Riven asked. Probably just a plaque and a headache, she replied. Riven nodded sagely. Sounds about right. Amara tapped her foot, glancing between them. So, what's the plan? We can't just keep reacting every time the Vortons decide to broadcast their greatest hits. We need alliances, Riven said, his tone shifting from sardonic to serious. If the Vortons come back, and they will, we need a network as strong as theirs. Stronger, Mira sighed, rubbing her eyes. Great. More people to convince we're not all crazy. They'll listen, Calix interjected. Our little demonstration has piqued some interest. Besides, desperation makes for strange bedfellows. Yeah, well, here's hoping they are at least slightly less strange than us, Mira said with a grin. Riven couldn't help but laugh. The bar's set pretty low on that one. As they spoke, the council members began to approach, their expressions a mix of caution and curiosity. It was time to make their case. Again. Amara lifted an eyebrow. Ready to play politics, Riven. I'd rather face the space squids again, he replied, then straightened, putting on his best serious leader face. But it's not like that's ever stopped me before. The counselors gathered around, a mix of worry and reluctant gratitude etched on their faces. Riven took a deep breath, readying himself for another round of persuasion. It was never easy, dealing with those who thought in dollars and cents instead of lives and losses, but it was necessary. "Counselors," Riven began, his voice steady, "you've seen what the Vortons can do. We've managed to fend them off this time, but we can't rely on human misery and outdated tech forever. We need to be prepared, and that means broadening our support network." One of the counselors, a man with a perpetually skeptical expression, raised a hand. "And how exactly do you propose we do that? We're not exactly the galaxy's favorite vacation spot." "By showing them what we've accomplished," Dell interjected, her voice firm. "Our survival against impossible odds is proof that we can take on threats others can't, or won't." Calix's avatar nodded in agreement. "Imagine what we could do with actual resources instead of scavenging the station's leftovers." Riven spread his hands. "We're not asking for charity, we're offering an alliance. One that could keep us all safe if we're smart about it." The counselors exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. It was a familiar dance, the weighing of options, the consideration of potential gain versus potential loss. Riven had seen it 100 times before. Finally, a councilwoman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue spoke up. "You've got our attention, Riven. But you better have more than just words to back it up." Riven grinned, a flash of defiance in his eyes. "I've got the scars to back it up, and if that's not enough, we'll make sure the next engagement leaves no doubt." The counselors nodded, some more reluctantly than others, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope in the murk of uncertainty. As the meeting dissolved into plans and propositions, Amara leaned close to Riven. "Think they'll bite?" Riven shrugged, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "If they don't, we'll bite back harder." Mira chuckled, crossing her arms. "Just another day at the office, right?" "Right," Riven said, glancing around at his ragtag team. They'd done the impossible, and now they had to do it all over again. But this time they weren't starting from the bottom of the heap. They had a foundation, however shaky, and a chance to build something stronger. As the discussions continued, Riven allowed himself a fleeting moment of optimism. He'd learned to savor them when they came, fleeting as they were. Calix flickered beside him, the avatar's features teetering between humor and sincerity. "You know, it might just work this time." Riven chuckled, the sound low and sardonic. "If it doesn't, at least we'll go out knowing we made one hell of a racket." "Music to my ears," Amara said, her grin sharp as ever. And so they moved forward, each step a testament, not to their survival but to their refusal to go quietly into the void. They were human after all, flawed, irreverent, and stubbornly alive. In the universe's grand game, maybe that was enough. With the council persuaded, at least for now, Riven and his team found themselves back in the station's underbelly. The corridors felt different post-crisis, as if the very walls had absorbed some of their resilience. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Either way, they had work to do. Mira was already knee-deep in the guts of Myriapolis, tools in hand, ready to coax life back into the battered systems. "You know," she said, voice echoing off the metal walls, "eventually we're going to have to find someone else to do this. I'm not exactly looking to spend my twilight years hunched over a circuit board." "I'll add a recruitment drive to our to-do list," Riven replied, inspecting a particularly crispy panel. "Right after we figure out how to convince people that frequent telepathic invasions isn't a deal-breaker," Amara snorted. "Think there's a market for that? Join us for impending doom and possible heroics. Benefits include existential dread and bragging rights." "Sounds like a winner to me," Mira grinned, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "At least until the next crisis." Calix's avatar flickered beside them, a digital specter in the dimly lit shaft. "I've already started drafting recruitment posters. Join us. We've got misery, but it's homemade." Riven laughed, the sound a bomb against the ever-present hum of the station. "At least we'll never be accused of false advertising." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the familiar rhythms of repair and banter keeping the specter of doom at bay. It was a precarious balance, but it was theirs. As the hours ticked by, the whir of machinery and the occasional clatter of tools became a backdrop to their thoughts. Riven pondered their next move, a more permanent alliance, a defense system that wouldn't collapse under pressure, maybe even a way to make peace with the Vortons. Not that he was holding his breath for that last one. "Hey, Riven," Mira called, breaking the quiet. "What do you think our chances are of peace?" Riven asked, glancing over his shoulder. Mira shook her head. "Nah." "Of surviving the next round with our sanity intact." Riven considered it, weighing the odds like a gambler at a cosmic poker table. "About the same as they've always been," he said finally. "Slim, but not impossible." Amara chuckled, a rich, dark sound. "Just the way we like it, then." "Exactly," Riven replied, returning to the task at hand. They were a motley crew, a patchwork of personalities and pasts, but somehow in the grand chaos of the universe, they'd found a way to make it work. It was messy and imperfect, but it was real. And as they toiled in the station's underbelly, the echoes of their broadcast still humming faintly in the distance, Riven felt a flicker of hope. Because if there was one thing they'd proven, it was that humanity had a knack for thriving in the darkness. They were survivors, misfits, heroes in their own way. And though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, they faced it with eyes wide open, ready to meet whatever came with grit, humor, and a healthy dose of defiance. In the grand scheme of things, maybe that was enough.